Dr. Sarah Chun looked at the big whiteboard on the wall. Numbers and letters covered every inch of it. Math problems that looked like a foreign language filled the space from top to bottom. She rubbed her tired eyes and sighed deeply. Around her, 19 other smart people sat in chairs or stood by tables. They all looked as tired as she felt. The lab at MIT was a mess. Coffee cups sat everywhere. Empty pizza boxes were stacked in corners. Papers covered with notes and drawings were scattered on every desk. The room smelled like old coffee and stress. These 20 scientists had been working in this room for 6 months. 6 long months of trying to solve one big problem. Sarah walked over to the machine in the center of the room. It was about the size of a large refrigerator. Wires came out of it in all directions. Small lights blinked on and off. This was their quantum computer. It was supposed to be the future of computing. It was supposed to solve problems that regular computers could never handle. But right now, it was just a very expensive problem. The quantum computer had one job. It needed to keep working without stopping for at least 10 seconds. That might not sound hard, but for a quantum computer, it was like asking someone to balance on a tightrope in a hurricane. The tiny parts inside the machine were so small and so sensitive that almost anything could make them stop working. Sarah's team had been hired by the government to make this machine work. The military wanted to use quantum computers to break secret codes and solve complex problems. They had given MIT millions of dollars in 1 year to make it happen. But after 6 months of work, the team was no closer to solving their problem. Then when they started, the problem was always the same. Every time they turned on the quantum computer, it would work perfectly for exactly 2 7/10 seconds. Then it would stop. Not slow down, not work badly, it would just completely stop working. The tiny quantum bits inside would lose their special properties and become useless. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez sat at his desk with his head in his hands. He was the team leader and one of the smartest quantum physicists in the world. He had written books about quantum computing. He had won awards for his work. But this problem was beating him. "Sarah," he called out, "run the test again." Sarah pressed the start button on the computer. The machine hummed to life. Numbers appeared on the screen showing that everything was working perfectly. The quantum bits were dancing together in their mysterious way, solving problems faster than any regular computer could dream of. 1 second passed. 2 seconds. The numbers on the screen were beautiful. Everything was perfect. Then, at exactly 2.7 seconds, the screen went blank. The humming stopped. The quantum computer was dead again. "Every single time," whispered Dr. Lisa Park, a young scientist who had joined the team 3 months ago. "It's like the machine has a timer inside it set to break at 2.7 seconds. The team had tried everything they could think of. They had taken the machine apart piece by piece and put it back together. They had checked every wire, every connection, every tiny part. They had brought in new parts from the factory. They had even built a completely new machine from scratch. Nothing worked. They had called experts from around the world. Scientists from Japan, Germany, and England had flown to MIT to look at their problem. Each expert had ideas and suggestions. The team tried every suggestion. None of them worked. Dr. Chun walked over to the coffee machine and poured herself another cup. It was her 8th cup today. The coffee was cold and bitter, but she needed the energy. She looked at the calendar on the wall. Red circles marked important dates. The biggest red circle was only 5 days away. That was their deadline. In 5 days, government officials would come to see their quantum computer working. If it wasn't working, the project would be canceled. MIT would lose millions of dollars. The team would lose their jobs. More importantly, the country would lose a chance to have the world's best quantum computer. Dr. Rodriguez stood up and walked to the whiteboard. He picked up a black marker and started writing new equations. His team watched him work. They had seen him do this hundreds of times before. He would write math problems, solve them, and come up with new ideas to try. "Maybe if we change the temperature," he said, writing numbers. "The quantum bits might last longer if we make them colder." We already tried that, said Dr. Park. We cooled them down to almost absolute zero, still 2.7 seconds. What about the magnetic field? Asked Dr. James Wright, an older scientist with gray hair. Maybe something is interfering with the magnetic field. We tested that too, Sarah replied. We put the whole machine in a special room that blocks all magnetic fields. Still 2.7 seconds. The team had tested everything. They had changed the electricity coming into the machine. They had moved the machine to different rooms. They had worked during the day and during the night. They had tried running the machine during thunderstorms and on clear, sunny days. Nothing made any difference. Dr. Rodriguez threw his marker down on the table. I don't understand it, he said loudly. The math says this should work. The physics says this should work. Every computer model says this should work, but it doesn't work. Young Dr. Park looked at her notebook. Every page was filled with test results. Every test showed the same thing, failure at 2.7 seconds. It's like something invisible is causing the problem, she said. Something we can't see or measure, the other scientists nodded. They had all had the same thought. There had to be something affecting their machine that they couldn't detect. But what could it be? They had checked for radio waves, magnetic fields, vibrations, temperature changes, and electrical interference. They had found nothing. Sarah sat down at her computer and pulled up the data from their latest tests. Graphs and charts filled her screen. Every graph showed the same pattern. The quantum computer would work perfectly, then suddenly stop at exactly 2.7 seconds. The pattern was so exact that it looked like someone had programmed it to fail. Maybe we should start over, suggested Dr. Wright. Maybe we should throw out everything we've built and start with a completely different design. Dr. Rodriguez shook his head. We don't have time. We have 5 days. 5 days to solve a problem that has beaten us for 6 months. The room fell quiet. Everyone knew he was right. 5 days was not enough time to build a new machine. They had to make this one work, or they would fail completely. Outside the lab windows, the sun was setting. The sky was turning orange and pink. Most people were going home to their families and their dinners. But the 20 scientists would stay in the lab all night, just like they had every night for months. They would drink more coffee, eat more pizza, and try more tests. But deep down, each of them was starting to think the same thing. Maybe this problem could not be solved. The clock on the lab wall showed 11:30 p.m. Dr. Sarah Chun looked around the room at her tired team. Dark circles had formed under everyone's eyes. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez had not gone home in 3 days. He had been sleeping on the small couch in his office and taking showers in the building's gym. This was their last night before the final deadline. Tomorrow, government officials would arrive to see their quantum computer working. If the machine failed again, everything would be over. 6 months of work would be wasted. Millions of dollars would be lost. Sarah walked to the quantum computer and placed her hand on its cold metal surface. One more time, she whispered to herself. Maybe this time will be different. She pressed the start button. The familiar humming began. The screen lit up with numbers and graphs. For a moment, hope filled her heart. The quantum bits were working perfectly. They were solving complex problems faster than any regular computer could manage. 1 second passed. The machine was still working. 2 seconds. Still perfect. 2.5 seconds. Sarah held her breath. 2.7 seconds. The screen went black. The humming stopped. The quantum computer was dead again. Dr. Rodriguez slammed his hand down on his desk. The sound was loud in the quiet lab. This is impossible, he shouted. We have checked everything. We have tested everything. What are we missing? Dr. Lisa Park was sitting at her computer, looking at test results from the past week. She had run the same test 50 times. Every time the result was exactly the same. The quantum computer died at 2.7 seconds. Not 2.6 seconds, not 2.8 seconds, always exactly 2.7 seconds. It's like clockwork, she said softly. Whatever is causing This happens every 2.7 seconds, like a clock ticking. Dr. James Wright, the oldest member of the team, was pacing back and forth across the room. His gray hair was messy from running his hands through it. "In 40 years of science," he said, "I have never seen anything like this. Problems usually have random causes. This is too exact, too perfect." If the team had brought in every expert they could find. Professor Tanaka from Tokyo had spent a week with them. Dr. Mueller from Berlin had flown in with special equipment. Dr. Thompson from Oxford had reviewed all their work. Each expert had the same reaction: confusion. Professor Tanaka had said, "Your math is perfect. Your machine is perfect. Something else is causing this problem." Dr. Mueller had brought sensitive instruments to measure tiny vibrations and electrical fields. He found nothing unusual. Dr. Thompson had suggested that maybe the problem was with the quantum theory itself. Maybe there was something about quantum physics that they didn't understand yet. Sarah remembered the conversation she had with Dr. Thompson before he left. "Dr. Chun," he had said, "sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. You are looking for complex scientific causes, but maybe the cause is something simple that you have overlooked." At the time, Sarah had thought this was just a polite way of saying they were stupid. But now, at midnight on their last day, she wondered if he was right. Dr. Rodriguez was standing at the whiteboard again. He had erased all the old equations and was starting over. "Let's think about this differently," he said. "What happens every 2.7 seconds in this building? What happens every 2.7 seconds in this city? What happens every 2.7 seconds in the world?" The team started calling out ideas. "Heartbeats?" suggested Dr. Park. "No, heartbeats are about once per second," replied Dr. Wright. "Radio signals from a satellite? We already blocked all radio signals? Maybe something underground? Like a subway train? Boston subway trains don't run every 2.7 seconds. They spent an hour thinking of things that might happen every 2.7 seconds. They thought of everything from bird migrations to moon phases to solar flares. Nothing made sense. Dr. Rodriguez threw down his marker again. This time it broke in half. "We're missing something obvious," he said. "Something so simple that we can't see it because we're too smart." Sarah understood what he meant. Sometimes very smart people look for very complicated answers to simple problems. They ignore simple explanations because they seem too easy. The team decided to try one more approach. They would run the quantum computer continuously for 1 hour and record everything that happened in the building during that time. Maybe they would see a pattern. Dr. Park set up cameras around the lab. Dr. Wright placed microphones to record all sounds. Sarah connected sensors to measure vibrations, temperature, and electrical changes. They would record everything and look for something that happened every 2.7 seconds. At exactly midnight, they started the test. The quantum computer began working. As always, it stopped at 2.7 seconds. But this time, they started it again immediately. And again, for 1 hour they ran the test over and over. Each time, the computer failed at exactly 2.7 seconds. The cameras recorded everything. The microphones picked up every sound. The sensors measured every tiny change. When the hour was over, the team gathered around Dr. Park's computer to review the recordings. They watched the camera footage at normal speed. Nothing unusual happened. They listened to the sound recordings. They heard normal building noises, air conditioning, elevators, people walking in hallways. Then Dr. Park had an idea. "Let's look at this differently," she said. "Instead of looking for something that happens when the computer fails, let's look for something that happens 2.7 seconds before the computer fails." She rewound the recordings and played them again. This time she started watching and listening 2.7 seconds before each failure on the first test. 2.7 seconds before the failure, she heard a very quiet sound. It was so quiet that they had not noticed it before. On the second test, the same quiet sound happened 2.7 seconds before the failure. On the third test, the same thing happened again. "There," Dr. Park said excitedly. "Do you hear that? Every 2.7 seconds, there's a tiny sound. The team gathered around the computer speakers. Dr. Park turned up the volume as high as it would go. They listened carefully. Every 2.7 seconds there was a very quiet clicking sound. It lasted for just a fraction of a second. It was so quiet that they had never noticed it during their 6 months of work. "What could make that sound?" asked Dr. Wright. "Something mechanical," said Dr. Rodriguez. "Something with moving parts. That operates on a timer." Sarah felt excitement growing in her chest. This was the first new clue they had found in months. "We need to find the source of that sound," she said. The team spread out through the lab, listening carefully. They moved in silence, trying to locate where the clicking sound was coming from. They checked all their equipment. They listened to the quantum computer itself. They checked the air conditioning vents and the electrical outlets. The sound was definitely in the lab, but they couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Dr. Rodriguez looked at his watch. It was now 1 a.m. In 8 hours, the government officials would arrive. "We're running out of time," he said. "But I think we finally have a real clue." For the first time in months, the team felt hope. They had found something new. They had found a pattern that they had never noticed before. Now they just had to figure out what was making that clicking sound every 2.7 seconds. As they continued to search the lab, none of them noticed the quiet man with the cleaning cart who was working his way down the hallway toward their room. Ernest Washington pushed his cleaning cart slowly down the long hallway of the MIT building. His keys jingled softly on his belt as he walked. At 67 years old, Ernie had been cleaning these halls for 12 years. He knew every corner, every room, and every sound in this building. Ernie was a tall, thin man with gray hair and kind eyes. His hands were rough from years of work, but his movements were careful and precise. He wore a dark blue uniform with MIT facilities printed on the pocket. His cart was filled with cleaning supplies, mops, and towels. Most people at MIT didn't really see Ernie. Students and teachers would walk past him without looking. To them, he was just part of the building, like a desk or a door. But Ernie saw everything. He watched the students studying late into the night. He noticed when professors were stressed about their work. He had learned to read the mood of the building just by looking and listening. Tonight felt different. As Ernie cleaned the 3rd floor, he could feel tension in the air. The quantum physics lab at the end of the hall was still bright with lights. Usually the labs were empty by midnight. But tonight, voices came from behind the closed door. Ernie had been watching the quantum physics team for months. Every night when he cleaned their lab, he saw the same thing: tired scientists, messy desks, and a big machine that never seemed to work right. He had listened to their conversations as he emptied their trash cans and cleaned their WHITEBOARDS. The team always talked about the same problem. Their machine would work for exactly 2.7 seconds, then stop. Ernie had heard this number so many times that he knew it by heart. 2.7 seconds. It was always 2.7 seconds. As Ernie moved closer to the lab, he heard voices getting louder. Someone sounded frustrated. Someone else was giving orders. He could tell they were having a crisis. Ernie had seen crises before. In his 12 years at MIT, he had watched many smart people struggle with difficult problems. Usually they figured things out eventually. But this quantum physics team seemed different. They had been struggling for months without success. The truth was, Ernie understood more about their problem than anyone knew. Before working at MIT, Ernie had spent 20 years in the United States Navy. He had been an electronics technician on ships and submarines. His job was to keep complex electronic equipment working in difficult conditions. In the Navy, Ernie had learned that smart people sometimes missed simple solutions. Officers with college degrees would spend hours trying to solve problems that experienced sailors could fix in minutes. Book knowledge was important, but practical experience was just as valuable. Ernie remembered one time on a submarine when the radar system kept failing. The officers brought in experts from the Navy's best technical schools. They ran tests and checked computers for weeks. Nothing worked. Finally, an old sailor noticed that the radar failed every time the coffee machine in the galley turned on. The coffee machine was creating electrical interference that affected the radar. The solution was simple: move the coffee machine to a different electrical circuit. That story had taught Ernie an important lesson. Sometimes the answer to a complex problem is something simple that smart people overlook because they're looking for complex solutions. As Ernie approached the quantum physics lab, he thought about the number 2.7 seconds. Where had he heard that number before? It seemed familiar, but he couldn't remember why. He stopped his cart outside the lab door and listened. The scientists were talking about running more tests. They sounded desperate. Dr. Chen was explaining their problem to someone new. Every 2.7 seconds, she said, like clockwork. Suddenly, Ernie's eyes widened. He knew where he had heard that number before. 2.7 seconds. It was the cycle time for the building's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. The VEC system. Ernie had worked with the building's maintenance team many times over the years. He knew the HVAC system better than almost anyone. The system was controlled by a large computer that managed the temperature and airflow throughout the entire building. Every 2.7 seconds, the system would check all its sensors and make tiny adjustments to motors and fans. The main HVAC motor was huge and powerful. It was located in the basement, but its effects could be felt throughout the building. Every 2.7 seconds, the motor would make a small adjustment. Most people never noticed it, but Ernie had learned to recognize the subtle vibrations and electrical changes that happened when the motor cycled. In the Navy, Ernie had learned that large electric motors could interfere with sensitive electronic equipment. The motors created electromagnetic fields that could affect computers, radios, and other devices. The interference was usually not strong enough to affect normal equipment, but very sensitive devices could be disrupted, Ernie thought. About the quantum computer in the lab. He had heard the scientists talking about how sensitive it was. They had mentioned that even tiny amounts of electrical interference could cause problems. If the quantum computer was as sensitive as they said, then the VEC motor's electromagnetic field could definitely affect it. The timing made perfect sense. Every 2.7 seconds, the VEC motor would cycle and create a brief electromagnetic pulse. This pulse would travel through the building's electrical system and affect the quantum computer. The computer would lose its delicate quantum state and shut down. Ernie felt excited. After months of watching the scientists struggle, he thought, he knew what was causing their problem. But he also felt nervous. How could he, a custodian with only a high school education, tell a room full of PhD scientists that he knew something they didn't? Ernie looked at his watch. It was 12:15 a.m. The scientists would be working all night, and tomorrow was their deadline. If he was right about the VEC system, they needed to know as soon as possible. He took a deep breath and knocked softly on the lab door. Through the glass, he could see the scientists gathered around their computers. They looked exhausted and frustrated. Dr. Chun noticed him and walked to the door. "Hi, Ernie," she said as she opened the door. "Working late tonight?" "Yes, ma'am," Ernie replied. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. You mentioned that your machine stops working every 2.7 seconds? Dr. Chun looked surprised that Ernie had been listening, but she wasn't angry. "That's right," she said. "It's been happening for months. We can't figure out what's causing it." Ernie hesitated for a moment. He was about to tell some of the smartest people in the world that he thought he knew something they didn't. It seemed impossible, but he had to try. "Dr. Chun," he said quietly, "I think I might know what's causing your problem." The other scientists heard this and looked up from their work. Dr. Rodriguez walked over to the door. "What did you say?" he asked. Ernie felt 20 pairs of eyes looking at him. His heart was beating fast. "I said I think I might know what's causing your problem with the 2.7 seconds. The lab fell completely quiet. The scientists stared at Ernie in disbelief. This was the custodian. He cleaned their floors and emptied their trash. How could he know something about quantum physics that they didn't? Dr. Chun looked at Ernie's sincere expression. She had always been kind to him, saying hello each morning and thanking him for his work. She knew he was a good man, even if she didn't know much about his background. "Okay, Ernie," she said gently. "Tell us what you think." Ernie stepped into the lab, feeling nervous but determined. 20 brilliant scientists were staring at him, waiting to hear what he had to say. He had never been the center of attention like this before. His hands were shaking slightly as he tried to find the right words. "Well," Ernie began, "I've been listening to you folks talk about this 2.7-second problem for months now. And tonight, when I heard Dr. Chun say it again, something clicked in my mind." Dr. Rodriguez crossed his arms and looked skeptical. "Go on," he said. Ernie took a deep breath. "You see, I worked in the Navy for 20 years before I came here. I was an electronics technician. My job was to keep sensitive electronic equipment working on ships and submarines." The scientists exchanged glances. They hadn't known about Ernie's background. "In the Navy," Ernie continued, "we learned that big electric motors can interfere with sensitive electronics. They create electromagnetic fields that can disrupt computers and radios." Dr. Park leaned forward. "What does that have to do with our quantum computer?" "Well," Ernie said, "this building has a very large VEC system. The main motor is in the basement and it's controlled by a computer. Every 2.7 seconds, the motor makes a small adjustment to control the airflow and temperature." Throughout the building, the room was completely silent. Every scientist was listening carefully. "Every time the motor cycles," Ernie explained, "it creates a brief electromagnetic pulse. That pulse travels through the building's electrical system. If your quantum computer is as sensitive as I've heard you say, then that electromagnetic pulse could be what's causing it to shut down." Dr. Chin's eyes widened. "Every 2.7 seconds, she whispered. "Every 2.7 seconds, Ernie confirmed. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Dr. Rodriguez shook his head. "That's impossible," he said. "We've tested for electromagnetic interference. We've shielded the quantum computer. We've checked everything." "Have you checked the HVAC system specifically?" Ernie asked. Dr. Rodriguez paused. "Well, no, we tested for general electromagnetic interference, but we didn't think about the building systems." Ernie nodded. "Most people don't think about the HVAC system because it's hidden in the walls and basement. But it's one of the most powerful electrical systems in the building." Dr. Wright stepped forward. "How do you know so much about our buildings?" "HVAC system?" "I've worked here for 12 years, Ernie replied. "I've helped the maintenance team with repairs many times. I know that system better than most people." Sarah felt excitement building in her chest. For the first time in months, they had a new theory that actually made sense. "Ernie," she said, "can you show us this HVAC system?" "Yes, ma'am," Ernie said. "But first, let me show you something that might prove my theory." Ernie walked over to a wall that the scientists had never paid attention to. It was covered by a large cabinet filled with books and supplies. "Help me move this cabinet," he said. Dr. Rodriguez and Dr. Wright grabbed one side of the cabinet while Ernie took the other. They slid it away from the wall, revealing a metal panel that none of the scientists had ever noticed. "This is a utility panel," Ernie explained. "It controls some of the building's electrical systems." He opened the panel, revealing a complex arrangement of switches, wires, and meters. "See this meter here?" Ernie pointed to a digital display. "It shows the electrical load from the VK system. Watch what happens." The scientists gathered around the panel. The meter showed a steady reading of 487 volts. They watched for several seconds. Nothing happened. Then suddenly the meter jumped to 502 volts for a brief moment, then returned to 487 volts. "There," Ernie said, "that's the HVAC motor cycling. It happens every 2.7 seconds. The scientists stared at the meter. After a few seconds, it jumped again, then again. The pattern was exactly what Ernie had described. Dr. Park looked at her watch and started counting. 2.7 seconds, she said as the meter jumped. 2.7 seconds, she said again as it jumped a second time. "My God," Dr. Rodriguez whispered, "the timing is perfect." Sarah felt her heart racing. "We need to test this immediately," she said. "If Ernie is right, then we can fix the problem by shielding the quantum computer from the VK system's electromagnetic field." The team rushed back to their quantum computer. Dr. Wright began searching through their equipment for electromagnetic shielding materials. Dr. Park started calculating how much shielding they would need. "Wait," said Dr. Rodriguez. "Before we start building shields, let's test Ernie's theory. If the VAE system is really causing the problem, then the quantum computer should work normally when the VAE system is turned off." "Can we turn off the HVAC system?" Dr. Chun asked. Ernie nodded. "I can call the maintenance supervisor. But turning off the VAE system will affect the entire building. We can probably do it for a few minutes, but not longer." "A few minutes is all we need," Dr. Rodriguez said. Ernie pulled out his cell phone and called the maintenance supervisor. It was 12:30 a.m., but the supervisor answered on the second ring. Building maintenance staff were used to emergency calls at all hours. "Hi, Tom," Ernie said. "This is Ernie Washington. I'm in the quantum physics lab and we need to turn off the main VAE system for about 5 minutes. Can you do that?" There was a pause. "Turn off the whole system?" "Do you know what you're asking, Ernie?" "That will affect the entire building." "I know," Ernie said, "but it's an emergency. These scientists are trying to solve a very important problem, and I think the VAE system might be interfering with their equipment." Another pause. "Okay, Ernie, I trust you. Give me 2 minutes to get to the control room, then I'll shut it down for 5 minutes. Ernie hung up the phone. "He'll shut it down in 2 minutes, he told the team. The scientists gathered around their quantum computer. Dr. Chen's finger was poised over the start button. They all watched the clock on the wall dot at exactly 12:32 a.m. They heard a change in the building's background noise. The quiet humming of the VAE system stopped. The building became eerily quiet. "Now," Dr. Rodriguez said. Sarah pressed the start button. The quantum computer came to life. The familiar numbers appeared on the screen. The quantum bits began their complex dance. 1 second passed. The computer was still working. 2 seconds. Still working. 2.7 seconds. Still working. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. The quantum computer was still running perfectly. 10 seconds, Dr. Park announced. 15 seconds. 20 seconds. The team watched in amazement as their quantum computer continued to work far beyond the 2.7-second limit that had plagued them for months. 30 seconds, Dr. Wright called out. 40 seconds. After exactly 1 minute, Dr. Chun stopped the test. The quantum computer had worked perfectly for 60 seconds without any problems. The lab erupted in cheers. Scientists hugged each other. Some had tears in their eyes. After 6 months of failure, they had finally found the answer, and the answer had come from Ernie Washington, the custodian who emptied their trash cans and cleaned their floors. "Ernie," Dr. Chun said, walking over to him with tears in her eyes, "you just saved our entire project." Ernie smiled modestly. "Sometimes," he said, "you just need to know where to look." The next morning, Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the same lab where she had spent 6 months of frustration. But today, everything was different. The quantum computer was humming quietly in the corner, working perfectly. Around the machine, the team had built a special electromagnetic shield. Using materials from the MIT engineering department, the shield was simple but effective. It was made of a special metal mesh that blocked the electromagnetic pulses from the VAE system while allowing the quantum computer to function normally. The whole solution had taken less than 3 hours to build once they knew what the problem was. At 9 a.m., 3 government officials arrived at the lab. They wore dark suits and carried briefcases. These were the people who would decide whether the quantum computer project would continue or be canceled. "Dr. Chun," said the lead official, a woman named Director Martinez, "we're here to see your quantum computer demonstration. We understand you've been having some technical difficulties." Sarah smiled. "We had some challenges," she said, "but we solved them. Our quantum computer is now working perfectly." The officials looked skeptical. They had heard about the team's 6 months of failures. They expected to see another disappointing demonstration. How long can your quantum computer run continuously? Director Martinez asked. As long as you want, Sarah replied confidently. Yesterday we ran it for 6 hours without any problems. Sarah walked to the quantum computer and pressed the start button. The machine came to life immediately. Numbers and graphs appeared on the screen showing complex calculations happening at incredible speed. What you're seeing, Sarah explained, is our quantum computer solving mathematical problems that would take regular computers thousands of years to complete. It's doing these calculations in real time. The officials watched in amazement as the machine continued to run. After 10 minutes, Director Martinez said, "This is impressive, Dr. Chun. What changed? How did you solve the problem that has been plaguing you for months?" Sarah looked across the room at Ernie, who was quietly cleaning a whiteboard in the corner. "We had help from an unexpected source," she said. "We learned that the smartest solution isn't always the most complicated one." Director Martinez followed. Sarah's gaze to Ernie. "I don't understand," she said. "The problem with our quantum computer was caused by the building's VK system," Sarah explained. Every 2.7 seconds, the system created an electromagnetic pulse that interfered with our quantum bits. We had been looking for complex scientific explanations, but the answer was much simpler. "And how did you discover this?" Director Martinez asked. Sarah walked over to Ernie. "Ernie," she said, "would you like to explain what you figured out?" Ernie looked surprised. He had been trying to stay out of the way during the important government meeting. "Oh, no, ma'am," he said. "This is your presentation. I just helped a little bit." "Ernie," Sarah said firmly, "you didn't just help a little bit, you solved the entire problem. Please, tell these people what you discovered." Ernie set down his cleaning cloth and walked over to the group. He looked nervous but spoke clearly. "Well," he said, "I've been watching this team work for months. I heard them talking about their 2.7-second problem, and it reminded me of something from my Navy days." He explained how he had recognized the timing pattern and connected it to the building's VK. He described his 20 years of experience with electromagnetic interference and sensitive electronics. The government officials listened with growing interest. When Ernie finished his explanation, Director Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Washington, that's remarkable. You solved a problem that stumped some of the best scientists in the country." Ernie shrugged modestly. "Sometimes experience is just as important as book learning," he said. The quantum computer demonstration was a complete success. The officials were impressed not only with the machine's performance but also with the story of how the problem was solved. They immediately approved continued funding for the project. After the officials left, Dr. Rodriguez called a team meeting. "Everyone," he said, "we need to talk about what happened here. We almost failed because we were too focused on complex theories and not enough on simple practical solutions." The team gathered around the conference table. Ernie was invited to join them, which made him feel proud and nervous at the same time. "Ernie," Dr. Rodriguez said, "what you did for us was extraordinary. You saved our project, our careers, and potentially our country's technological future." Dr. Chun stood up. "I've been thinking about this all night," she said. "We need to make some changes to how we approach problems. We need to remember that wisdom can come from anywhere." She looked at Ernie. "Ernie, we would like to offer you a position as a technical consultant on our team. Your practical experience and different perspective are exactly what we need." Ernie's eyes widened. "You want me to work with you? But I'm just a custodian. I don't have a college degree." "You have something more valuable than a degree," Dr. Wright said. "You have 20 years of hands-on experience with complex systems. And you have the ability to see simple solutions that we miss." Ernie thought about the offer. He had enjoyed helping the team solve their problem. It felt good to use his Navy training again. "What would I do?" he asked. "You would review our work from a practical perspective," Sarah explained. "When we get stuck on a problem, you would help us think about simple explanations that we might be overlooking." Ernie smiled. "I'd like that," he said. The story of the custodian who solved the quantum computer problem quickly spread throughout MIT. Within a week, it was being told at universities around the world. The story became a legend in scientific circles, reminding researchers that brilliance can come from unexpected places. MIT's administration was so impressed that they created a new policy. From that day forward, all major research projects would include input from the building's maintenance and custodial staff. These workers had practical knowledge about the building's systems that could affect sensitive experiments. Ernie was given a small office next to the quantum physics lab. He was also given a significant raise and a new title, technical consultant. Practical systems analysis. He continued to work some custodial shifts because he enjoyed the work, but he also spent time reviewing research projects and offering practical insights. 6 months later, Dr. Chen was invited to speak at a major scientific conference about the quantum computer project. She told the story of how they had solved their most difficult problem. "We learned an important lesson," she told the audience of scientists and engineers. "Sometimes the most valuable knowledge comes not from textbooks or research papers, but from people who have spent years working with their hands and observing how things actually work in the real world." In the back of the auditorium, Ernie Washington sat quietly and listened. He was wearing a new suit that MIT had bought for him. On his lapel was a small pin that read, "MIT Technical Consultant." When Dr. Chen finished her presentation, the audience gave her a standing ovation. She looked back at Ernie and smiled. He had taught her and her team that intelligence comes in many forms and that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unexpected places. As people filed out of the auditorium, many stopped to shake Ernie's hand and thank him for his contribution to science. Ernie was humble and polite, but inside he felt proud. He had gone from being invisible to being recognized as an important part of the team. The quantum computer project continued to be successful. The machine was eventually used by the government for important national security work. And in the technical reports that documented the project's success, there was always a special section that told the story of how a custodian named Ernest Washington had solved the problem that stumped 20 PhD scientists. Ernie's story became a reminder that in science, as in life, the best solutions often come from the most unexpected places. All you need is someone with the wisdom to know where to look.